Hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Tammy. I am a part-time PhD candidate and a reader and a researcher, and today we're talking about books. I have not done any preparation for this video. I was actually just watching Kate's, one of Kate's videos, I think that she posted in late December, and I was like, hey, I haven't done a video in a while. I felt like talking to camera. So we're here. I don't even have my microphone because it's not charged, because I haven't turned on my camera for vlogging in quite some time, as you can see by my latest videos. Today we're just going to talk really quickly about some of the books that I read in January, so you can call it a January roundup of some books that I read recently. So I'm going to talk about some NetGalley books, some e-arcs that I did not finish. January's been a bit of a weird reading month for me. I've been quite busy with work. I was on vacation until halfway through January, where I didn't have time to read because I was hiking. But I really wanted to get to these two e-arcs that I got from NetGalley, and unfortunately I finished those, or I ended up DNFing them really early in January. The first one was one that I was really looking forward to. It's Josephine Baker's memoir, Fearless and Free, a memoir. This is actually going to be published for the first time in the US, I think, yeah, on the 3rd of February 2025, of Josephine Baker, who is obviously the Black woman who was a dancer, a singer, and also civil rights activism, both in the US and abroad. She spent a lot of time in Paris during sort of the height of the Harlem Renaissance. The memoir is written by a person who spent a lot of time with her while she was in Paris, and so it's more of like an oral history. I just really couldn't get into it. It was really piecemeal. Basically, it's not like, it wasn't written as a memoir, it's written as stories of her life, but there's so much of the perspective of this other person who was writing it for her, so who basically was doing the oral history work. I can't remember the name of the man, and I just really didn't engage with it. I think whoever has access to her archive obviously wanted to get this out, but I just think that maybe it could have been a series of essays or something that was included in like a podcast or sort of like documentary type style thing, because I just didn't think that it worked in the book format. And also it wasn't made clear that this was sort of the structure of the book, sort of like anywhere until you actually start reading the book. So I was a bit disappointed. So I DNF'd that. The second book that I DNF'd is Dengue Boy by Michel Nivea, translated by Rahul Berry. I think this is translated from Portuguese. It's a Latin American author. I was really excited about this book. The description sounds great. Close to Cronenberg and deeply indebted to Kafka, this gaucho punk novel offers an explosive interpretation of an ultra-capitalistic society at the grips with climate collapse, kind of like a dystopian fiction novel. I DNF'd this because, as I said on Storygraphed, stopped at 12%, too grotesque. It was just too gory, too grotesque. The synopsis is basically there's this sort of like hybrid Frankenstein's monster type, what is it? It is a mosquito bug, half human like thing that is the main protagonist. We're in 2197, sort of like post-apocalyptic world where the world is similar to as we know it, so but different. The Antarctic ice caps have melted, and this like mutant person of child of mosquito is we're basically navigating the world, so kind of like a coming of age of that as well. I just couldn't get into it. It was way too grotesque for me. It was way too gross, and I really didn't like it, which sucks because it's like a dark comedy dystopian, but the grotesqueness of it really turned me off. So those are the 2 books that I DNF'd. So let's go to the books that I have read so far in January. 2 are physical, and then 2 are on ebooks, and we're just going to start. So the first one is Disorientation by Elaine Chu, and I think this has been really popular online for a while. Basically, it's this Taiwanese American woman who is a PhD student who is investigating this renowned Chinese American poet. She finds something in the archive that leads her on this sort of like crazy discovery of betrayal and lies and issues of like academia, and at the same time we're sort of seeing her personal life change and sort of crumble, both with her relationship with her partner, and there's sort of like undercurrent of discourse on interracial relationships, first generation Taiwanese and in general Asian Americans, activism on campus, Asian friendships. There's a lot, like it reminds me of like a very like discourse heavy, particularly online discourse heavy book, sort of like if you think about post 2020 Black Squares, listening and learning, reading lists, like that kind of discourse, not that sort of like pandering soapbox, but a lot of like the articles that came out in that time, like what does it mean to be an ally to Asian Americans? That kind of vibe. This was fine. It was an easy read. I figured out the sort of twist fairly quickly. I just didn't like, I think I rated it 3.5 stars. It was just like felt, as I said on Storygraph, a little bit discoursey. I like the twists and turns in the plot, but I thought the characters were a bit one-dimensional. They really felt like stock characters, like these flattened versions of like the Taiwanese American immigrant, and like whose parents are so Taiwanese, but then in some ways they're like super American, and then the whole like I'm Taiwanese but I'm also American, and what does that mean? And then even like the discourse on academia just wasn't doing anything new for me. As someone who's also in academia, it just felt like an easy read. I can see why it was really popular. It's just not for me. It's not meaty enough. It's not challenging enough for me in any of these issues that it's talking about, because it's too surface level. Very plot driven, really easy to go ahead and read. And my light just decided to die, so hold on. Okay, my spotlight decided to die, so you can see how I haven't charged any of my camera equipment, so we're just gonna roll with it. But yeah, Disorientation was fine. We're just gonna say it was fine. The next book I read, I think I might be one of the few people who feel this way about this book. The next book I read is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. Everyone's been talking about this book online. It's this book about this protagonist who's obsessed with this notion of martyrs and what it means, and it's related to his personal history. He's Iranian American, also sort of set in a university campus. And sorry, I'm just reading it on Storygraph. I'm just gonna come out and say it. I did not like this book. Not that I didn't like it. I just thought it was super overhyped. I feel a little bit nervous about saying this because everyone has been talking about how great this book is and how incredible it is and how the writing is phenomenal, and I just don't see it. And this book just didn't work for me, and I think that's okay. So the first thing I want to say that Martyr is an incredibly inventive novel. The idea of martyrdom and what that means in personal terms and political terms, that's something that I've never read before in fiction, so I was really intrigued by it. I think the biggest issue I have with the book was the structure of the book in terms of character development and also in terms of, in general, just like it needing an edit. I think it was really trying to do too much, and it reminds me of something where we would say reduce, like simplify, sort of like stick to what the core and the heart of the novel is, which is really about the protagonist and the relationship to Iran and his relationship to his parents' martyrdom, right? Like that's the core thesis, the core conceit of the book, and I felt like there was too many accoutrements that was trying to do a lot. There was like the poetry, there was the different POVs and the different attempts at a different tone, which just for me, didn't hit it. I think the core and the heart of the story was quite fragmented, and again, for me, in another way, similar to Disorientation, the twist was very obvious for me at the beginning of the book. I think for something that is sort of like framed in the genre of literary fiction, the characters are really underexplored. Like this isn't a really plotty book. There's a little bit of a plot line there when he goes to Brooklyn and that whole situation, but it really is about the characters, particularly because of the choices of having the different perspectives. And for me, the main character was lost. The main character's voice disappeared, and so I felt like Cyrus's character should have been a lot stronger. There was no sort of exploration, I felt like, of Cyrus's depression and his addiction, really. They were sort of used as plot points, but I didn't really understand why. And also I thought that like his and Z's, just another character's relationship, was like super rich but also kind of like underexplored into sort of the last couple of chapters. I also said on Zoyograph that I would love to spend more time, which seems like maybe ridiculous to say, but on the grief and the relationship around him and his mother, that also felt like really underexplored. And then also the sort of the through line of like identifying as Iranian, even though you know, the character had not spent any time in Iran. And then the last thing I said was like the theme of martyrs was way too heavy-handed, like smacked over our heads with it again and again and again. Just like what I meant in general about like it needing an edit for me. And so at the same time, it was like over and heavy-handed and then superficial, but also in some ways like underexplored. Like it was like martyrs and like these are examples of martyrs. And then like for me, that's where it like stopped and that's where it ended. The last thing I'm going to say is that although I know a lot of people have been hyping this up, I feel like there's just something there about novels that are somewhat related to or adjacent to trauma that like white publishing and that industry in general loves. And that's all I'm going to say about that. The last two books that I read in January, I was in Nepal hiking and I was thinking about communism and overthrowing the government because and liberation. And I've read a lot of communist theory, but I've never actually read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And so I hope this doesn't get my video taken down. I found this in a bookstore in Nepal, and I found that it was because it's published by a Nepalese publisher, which I really liked. That's a lie, it's an Indian publisher, but they have a outpost in Nepal, Fingerprint Classics. And so yeah, I picked this up. I think it was like $3, so great steal. It is what it is, outlining the manifesto of communism as told by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and this one is quite interesting. I'm not sure if the other ones have it, but it's obviously Marx was dead by the time this was published. And so in this version, there's like annotations by Engels about what he thought perhaps like Marx was thinking, or his own, you can see this sort of like notes in general on Manifesto. So I read that. I gave it 4 stars. It's a little bit dense, but I think particularly the explanation about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie and the need for a strong coalition of working class resistance is more than ever applicable and necessary today. The last book I have read in January is The Loneliness Files by Athena Dixon. It's a memoir and essays. I picked this up in Seattle. I'm getting into a habit of writing where I am and when I bought books. Just feels like nice, I don't know. Bought this in Seattle when I was with Emily. I was on a book ban, but then she found this book for me and she was like, I think it's related to your book. I haven't really said this, but I have an agent now, officially signed the contract. I'm writing a book, a literary agent, hoping to hoping to get it sold this year, ideally. This book, you know me, if you've been watching any of my book videos, you know I love a bit of memoir, nonfiction, particularly around internet, intimacy, loneliness, and this memoir and essays talks about a lot of those things. The back of the book says, what does it mean to be a body behind a screen? Athena Dixon in this book basically discusses her relationship with loneliness, being alone, living in a body that is not seen as societally acceptable or desirable. What does it mean to die when no one knows you're dead? Sort of like the horrors, and like one of the biggest fears I have as someone who lives alone is like, what if something happens to me and I'm unwell and I die and nobody finds the body for years? Athena talks about some of these topics. It sounds really morbid. It's not as morbid because Athena is also confirming my thesis, which is that the best memoir writers and the best nonfiction writers are also poets, because Athena is also a poet. I will say that at some of the essays, I had really started to understand the tone and the pacing and almost the cadence of Athena's writing, and so that in some ways made it feel a little bit monotonous towards the end, because I was kind of like expecting the kind of language and the allusions that she would use, but it doesn't take away from the gorgeousness of the book. Some of these books talk about romantic comedy. She does an analysis of Us by Jordan Peele. She talks about The Truman Show, and it's just a really great collection of essays and memoir and essays. I will say the first half of the book is probably the book that deals more closely with the subject matter of loneliness than the second half. I also know that some of these essays were published elsewhere before being added to this book collection, and so sometimes that can make it feel a little bit fragmented, which I do think maybe like happened here a little bit. As you can see, I've got annotations. I've highlighted some sections in here as well. I love how Athena also looks into other cultures' understandings of things like loneliness. So she talks about the Japanese term sotokomori, which is those people who are not fully isolated from society, but do sort of their best or feel their best by existing online. I highlighted that because that really resonated with me. Yeah, a great book, also published by Tin House, which I'm also realizing is a publisher that tends to publish books that I really like. I also love the cover. Yeah, so if you're interested in picking up a new memoir for 2025, then I would give this one a whirl. I have nothing else to say, but yeah, this is my little mini January wrap up. I hope the beginning of 2025 has been as gentle and non-ghetto as possible at the beginning of a new year in the midst of winter, and I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye.